Hollywood's golden boy and late-night host clash in an unprecedented on-air meltdown. What began as routine promotion for Tom Cruise's latest blockbuster spiraled into a bitter exchange of accusations and personal attacks, ending with America's biggest star storming off set and leaving Jimmy Kimmel to face the consequences. The studio lights seemed brighter than usual at the El Capitan Theater last night. The audience, primed with excitement, erupted in applause as Jimmy Kimmel welcomed Tom Cruise to the stage. Cruise entered with his trademark megawatt smile, bounding across the studio with characteristic energy, high-fiving audience members along the way. "The one and only Tom Cruise, everyone!" Kimmel announced, his voice carrying over the cheers. The two exchanged pleasantries, with Cruise settling into the guest chair, adjusting his perfectly tailored Navy suit. He was there to promote Horizon's Edge, his latest action thriller already generating Oscar buzz. For the first 10 minutes, everything proceeded according to the familiar late-night script. Cruise charmed the audience with behind-the-scenes anecdotes about performing his own stunts. Kimmel nodded along, interjecting with his usual sardonic humor. The atmosphere was light, professional, collaborative, until it wasn't. "So, Tom," Kimmel began, his tone shifting subtly as he shuffled his note cards, "I've always wanted to ask you about some of your more interesting associations." Cruise's smile remained fixed, but those familiar with his expressions noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "What do you mean, Jimmy?" Kimmel leaned forward. "Well, you know, there are certain figures in your past that have raised eyebrows, people you've defended publicly despite overwhelming evidence against them." The audience's collective intake of breath was audible. This wasn't part of the agreed-upon talking points. Cruise's publicist, visible from the wings, stepped forward. Before catching herself, "I'm not sure what you're getting at," Cruise replied, his voice measured but cooling rapidly. "I'm here to talk about the film." Of course," Kimmel said, waving dismissively. "But don't you think your audience deserves some honesty? After all, you're selling yourself as much as the movie." Cruise's legendary composure began to crack. "I've always been honest with my fans. I've been in this business for 4 decades because people trust me." "Trust is earned," Kimmel countered, his casual demeanor belied by the deliberate precision of his words. "And sometimes I wonder if you've earned it, or if you've just manufactured it like one of your stunts." The audience's nervous laughter died quickly. This wasn't the playful banter they'd expected. It was something altogether more uncomfortable. The cameraman panned to Cruise, capturing the calculated control in his expression, the practiced art of containing anger rather than expressing it. "You know, Jimmy," Cruise said, straightening in his chair, "I've always respected what you do here, but there's a line between edgy comedy and disrespect." "Is there?" Kimmel retorted. "Because I thought my job was to ask the questions people want answered, not just lob softballs so you can plug your next project." Cruise's smile had vanished entirely now. "If you had questions, your team could have raised them with mine before the show. That's how professionals handle things." "Ah, professionalism," Kimmel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call it when you control every aspect of an interview? When your people demand approval over questions, lighting, camera angles?" The tension in the studio had become palpable. Staff members exchanged worried glances. The network executives, watching from the control room, began making urgent phone calls. "I've never hidden who I am," Cruise said, voice taut with restraint. "My work speaks for itself." Does it? Or does it just distract from the real conversations we should be having about the people you've supported, the organizations you've funded? Cruise stood abruptly, microphone still clipped to his lapel. "I think we're done here, Jimmy." Kimmel raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise. "What's wrong? Can't handle a few tough questions? I thought you were all about facing fear head-on." The audience watched in stunned silence as Cruise removed his microphone with deliberate care. No one had ever seen the consummate professional lose his composure like this. The unthinkable was happening on live television. Tom Cruise was walking out. "You've changed, Jimmy," Cruise said, his quiet voice somehow more damning than if he'd shouted. "This isn't the show I agreed to be on." And then, as Kimmel opened his mouth to deliver what would surely be the most devastating blow yet, the feed abruptly cut to commercial. When the broadcast resumed, viewers were greeted with the jarring sight of an empty guest chair. Cruise had removed his microphone but hadn't yet made it off stage, hovering at the periphery of the camera's frame. The studio audience's confused murmurs created an uncomfortable background soundtrack. Kimmel, uncharacteristically flustered, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems our guest needs a moment," Kimmel said, forcing a strained laugh. "Maybe he's preparing for another stunt?" The joke fell flat. A woman in the front row shook her head in visible disapproval. Cruise turned back, his composure regained during the brief commercial break. Years of media training had taught him how to navigate difficult situations, but this ambush had caught even him off guard. He stepped back into the light, not returning to the guest chair, but standing firmly center stage. "You know what, Jimmy? I've respected you for years. I've come on this show multiple times. But what you're doing right now isn't comedy or journalism. It's just cruelty dressed up as entertainment." Kimmel's smirk wavered slightly. He hadn't expected Cruise to re-engage. "Oh, come on, Tom. We're just having a conversation. Isn't that what you're here for?" "No," Cruise replied, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. "I came here to connect with fans about a project hundreds of people poured their hearts into creating. I didn't come here to be blindsided with personal attacks." The audience stirred uncomfortably. The show's director frantically signaled to Kimmel from the wings, drawing a finger across his throat. "Cut this off now." But Kimmel, perhaps sensing his ratings would soar from this confrontation, pressed on. "Personal attacks? I'm just asking questions the public wants answered. About your associations, your choices." Is accountability suddenly off-limits for Tom Cruise? Cruise took a deliberate step forward. "Accountability works both ways, Jimmy. When was the last time you held yourself accountable for turning meaningful discourse into cheap shots for ratings? For ambushing guests who trusted you to be professional?" The camera caught Kimmel's expression hardening. This wasn't following his script. Professional? That's rich coming from someone who has his entire entourage micromanage every detail of an appearance. "Does your team approve which socks I wear too?" A palpable tension filled the studio. Production assistants looked anxiously toward their superiors, uncertain whether to intervene. The band leader nervously tapped his fingers against his thigh, ready to cut in with music at the first signal. "You're deflecting, Jimmy," Cruise replied. "This isn't about production details, it's about basic respect, something that seems in short supply here tonight." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, arms spread wide in feigned innocence. "I'm just a comedian asking questions. If they hit a nerve, maybe that says more about you than me." "No," Cruise countered, his voice gaining intensity without rising in volume. "It says you've forgotten what made your show worth watching. It wasn't ambushes or gotcha moments, it was authentic conversations." Something shifted in the room. Audience members exchanged glances, a few nodding in agreement with Cruise. Sensing the tide turning, Kimmel attempted to pivot. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Let's talk about the movie. Those helicopter scenes looked pretty intense." "That's not going to work," Cruise interrupted, shaking his head. "You don't get to switch gears once your tactics backfire. The industry has changed, Jimmy. People are tired of the cynicism, the mockery, the humiliation disguised as humor." The camera caught a bead of sweat forming on Kimmel's temple. "I think you're overreacting a bit, Tom. It's just a talk show." "No, it's not just a talk show. It's a platform. And how you use that platform matters." The director was now frantically signaling for another commercial break, but Kimmel ignored him, determined to have the last word. Speaking of platforms, Kimmel said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, let's talk about how you use yours, particularly when it comes to your family arrangements. The audience gasped. Even for Kimmel, this was crossing a line everyone recognized. Cruz's children had always been strictly off-limits in interviews. For the first time, Cruz's careful control slipped. A flash of genuine anger crossed his face. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," Kimmel pressed, sensing vulnerability, and moving in for what he thought would be the finishing blow. "Everyone wonders about the unusual circumstances with your—" "Stop!" Cruz commanded with such authority that Kimmel actually fell silent mid-sentence. "You've disrespected me all evening, and I've remained professional. But my family is not fodder for your ratings. Not now, not ever," Kimmel smirked. "But the public has questions about—" "The public," Cruz cut in, his voice vibrating with controlled fury, "deserves better than this. They deserve hosts who elevate conversation, not degrade it. They deserve better than you've become, Jimmy." The silence that followed was deafening. The camera operator zoomed in on Kimmel's face, capturing the exact moment his smug certainty collapsed into the realization that he had miscalculated badly. "And frankly," Cruz continued, removing his earpiece and dropping it on the floor, "so do I." The entire studio fell into a stunned silence as Cruz turned his back on Kimmel and began walking toward the exit. The late-night host, suddenly aware that his calculated provocation had backfired spectacularly, scrambled to salvage the situation. "Come on, Tom," Kimmel called after him, his voice betraying a hint of desperation. "Don't be so sensitive. It's all in good fun, right? That's what we do here." Cruz paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to face not Kimmel, but the audience. His gaze swept across the rows of spectators who had witnessed this unprecedented breakdown of late-night decorum. "Is it fun?" Cruz asked them directly. "Is this what you came here to see tonight?" Several audience members shook their heads. Someone called out, "No, it's not right." Another voice added, "We respect you, Tom." Kimmel's face flushed as he realized he was losing control, not just of his guest, but of his audience. The camera caught his expression hardening as he tried one last approach. "Look, folks, this is just how interviews go sometimes," Kimmel said with forced lightness. "If you can't take the heat—" "This isn't about heat," Cruz interrupted, addressing the audience rather than Kimmel. "This is about basic human respect. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've done thousands of interviews. I understand tough questions. I welcome them. What I don't welcome is ambush journalism masquerading as entertainment." A smattering of applause broke out, growing stronger as more audience members joined in. Kimmel's smile became increasingly strained. "You know what?" Cruz continued, his voice gaining strength. "We're all trying to navigate a world that's increasingly divided, where it's easier to tear people down than build them up, where controversy gets more clicks than kindness. I've made mistakes in my life, plenty of them. I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to treat people with dignity." The applause grew louder. Kimmel's producers were frantically signaling from offstage, but the host seemed frozen in his chair, watching his carefully orchestrated takedown transform into something entirely different. "I came here tonight to talk about a film," Cruz said. "A film that hundreds of talented people poured their hearts into, people who deserve better than to have their work overshadowed by manufactured drama." He gestured toward the movie poster, displayed on the set's backdrop. "These are the people I'm standing up for right now. The crew, the cast, the technicians, the artists, people who create rather than tear down." The studio lights suddenly dimmed, clearly an attempt by the production team to force a commercial break and cut Cruz off. But before they could fade to black, someone in the control room, perhaps sensing the historical significance of the moment, brought the lights back up. Kimmel, visibly flustered, attempted to regain control. "We'll be right back after these messages." "No," Cruz said firmly. "I think we're done." With that, he walked off stage. Not storming, not running, but with the measured dignity of someone making a conscious choice to remove himself from a toxic situation. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Kimmel's expression as it cycled through shock, anger, and finally, the dawning realization of what had just transpired. The host loosened his tie, uncharacteristically speechless. After several uncomfortable seconds, he managed to say, "Well, that happened. We'll be right back with something else, I guess." The feed cut to commercials, but not before catching the beginning of a mass exodus. Audience members were standing up, collecting their belongings, heading for the exits. Many were murmuring among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval. Backstage, Cruise was already on the phone with his team, his voice calm but resolute. "No statements tonight, no tweets, no damage control. What happened out there speaks for itself." His publicist nodded, already fielding dozens of incoming calls from media outlets clamoring for comments. "Are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Cruise thought for a moment. "You know what? I am. Some things matter more than publicity." As his team gathered around him, preparing to navigate the coming media storm, Cruise's phone buzzed with incoming messages. Colleagues, friends, even competitors, all expressing support for his stand against what many viewed as the increasingly toxic landscape of celebrity culture. By morning, the clips had gone viral. Respect Matters was trending worldwide. Late-night ratings reports showed a precipitous drop for Kimmel's show, while social media analytics revealed an overwhelming public sentiment in Cruise's favor. Network executives huddled in emergency meetings. Sponsors called expressing concerns about being associated with ambush tactics. The conversation had shifted dramatically from whatever gossip Kimmel had hoped to generate to a larger discussion about decency in media. 3 days later, Kimmel issued a carefully worded apology on air, acknowledging he had crossed a line and failed to show the respect that all guests deserve. The statement, clearly crafted by a crisis management team, rang hollow to many viewers who had witnessed the sincerity of Cruise's unscripted stand. For Cruise, the incident ultimately enhanced rather than damaged his standing in Hollywood. Directors and producers commended his professionalism under pressure. Younger stars publicly cited him as an example of setting boundaries in an industry often lacking them. In the end, one industry veteran commented to Variety, "Kimmel thought he was revealing something about Cruise, but he ended up revealing far more about himself and about what we've allowed our culture of entertainment to become." The confrontation became a case study in entertainment journalism classes and a turning point in how celebrity interviews were conducted. It reminded viewers and media personalities alike that behind every public figure was a human being deserving of basic dignity, a simple truth that had somehow been forgotten in the relentless pursuit of viral moments and trending topics. And somewhere in Los Angeles, as the media cycle eventually moved on to its next obsession, Tom Cruise returned to what he'd always done best, making movies and treating people with respect along the way.